Hello and welcome back. So I asked you to read up on active record associations. I hope you were able to go through it briefly. If not, that's okay. We're going to talk about it in detail in this video, but after this video, if you need a reference point, feel free to read through it. Okay, the other thing was the SQL tutorial. I hope you enjoyed that and enjoyed learning about how to query a database. Okay. So what's important is to visualize what a database is. Here's a MVC diagram. We're going to look exclusively at this layer right here, okay? Database and model. And what's going on here? Why do we focus on this layer? Because this is pretty much an independent layer from your application, and it's very important to treat it as such. With the database and model, your model in Rails is basically active record. And active record allows you to use your models to communicate with your database. And active record is an object relational mapper, okay, an ORM. And you will hear this quite a lot. And it allows you to use Ruby code to communicate via your models with your database. And what am I talking about here? Let's take a look at a couple of tables to understand what a database is. A database is essentially a collection of tables, okay? And you can think of the tables as basically sheets. You know, Microsoft Excel, you have multiple sheets. You can think of each table as a sheet. So let's pull up a couple of tables in a database. There you go. There's a database. And here is an articles table. And here is a users table. You see how it looks kind of like sheets in Excel. You have rows and you have columns. Now the column headers, they are called attributes for the tables. So let's take a look at this articles table. Okay, you have the ID that Rails generates, and you have these two attributes, title and description. And then you have information that goes into these tables. And similarly, we have a users table, we have an ID that's generated by Rails, and then you have username, and then you have email, okay? So these are two separate tables in your application's database. So what is a relational database? A relational database is essentially where you can connect or link up these two tables. Let's say a user, okay? A user can have multiple articles. They can write many articles. So Masroor, this first user, can write many articles in this articles table. And each one would have a separate row. Okay? You are essentially able to relate one table to another. That's why it's called a relational database. Now, how do you relate one table to another? You relate one table to another by having some sort of identifier in the table that identifies the creator or the other table. So in here, if you were to have, let's say, articles and you wanted to relate it to users, you could have a user's name in here. You could have a different column in this articles table with a user's name. However, you could have multiple users with the same name. So what you essentially do is you have a foreign key column, which is essentially unique, and it would have a unique feature from this table. So let's say user ID. We know user ID is unique. That's the primary key. And the foreign key would essentially be the primary key of this table. So let's take a look. There you go. You have something like this. You'll have a user ID column in your articles table, okay? And then you have it listed with the primary key of the person who created this. So it's the same diagram, okay, except now I have my articles table, this additional column that's called user underscore ID. And in there, let's look at the first one. Great weather title, great weather, description, great weather outside today, user ID 3. So if I go to my users table, look at user ID 3, I see Jack at example.com. So there is a way for me to now associate Jack with this article, that's great weather outside today, even though they're in two separate tables. So there's a relationship, right? There's a relational database. That's what's going on here, okay? And take a look at the second article. Second article, description, today is a great day for coding, user ID 2. User ID 2 in my users table is Joe. So there is a relationship between Joe and this article. So I have a way of linking these tables. Now let's take this a step further. Okay, let's take a look at this diagram, all right? From a different perspective. Here I have this M star signifying the many side and 1 signifying the one side. What I'm going to try to explain is what a one-to-many association is. A one-to-many association is essentially one user can have many articles, and articles have to belong to a user, okay? One article can belong to a user, but one article cannot belong to many users. Then it would be a many-to-many association. So essentially, one user, for example, Masroor user ID 1, can have many articles. You could have 1, 2, 3, all three of these. User ID could have been 1, okay? And Masroor could have written all three of these articles. So that's a one side for user and many side for articles. Take a look on this diagram, okay? You have articles, you have user ID. So this first article, okay, which is great weather outside today, has user ID 3. And then take a look at this last article about Rails. This is a great article about Rails. User ID is also 3. So that means Jack at example.com, has created 2 articles and is linked to these 2 articles. Okay, so one on Jack's side, on the user side, and many on the article side. Similarly, you could have Masroor or Joe or anyone else create multiple articles. So each row in the articles table belongs to a user, and a user can have many articles. And in Rails, this one-to-many association is signified by a has many and a belongs to. Okay, so has many will be on the one side and belongs to will be on the many side. And to understand this further, we need to understand models, okay? And I'm gonna explain this by demonstrating it. And I'm not gonna use my Recipes app because My Recipes is the production app that we're building. So I'm gonna do this in the To-Do app. So I'm gonna exit out of my Recipes and go to To-Do app, okay? So let's demo this. I'm in the To-Do app now folder. And so if we look at our schema for To-Do app, we have a to-dos table, name and description, okay? So what if we add a users table to this and try to associate to-dos with users? Just like our diagram right here, instead of articles with title and description, we're gonna have to-dos with name and description, and we're gonna create a users table and associate them, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to Rails generate migration create users, and I'm going to do this in the To-Do app. Okay, this creates the users table, and let's pull it up, and I'm simply going to have name and email. So t dot string name, t dot string email. And I'm also going to have timestamps. What timestamps do is they give you created at and updated at dates time for the row in the database. So you can take a look at when users got created, etc., etc. So timestamps. I'll save that. So let's go ahead and run this migration. Rails db :migrate. Okay, so now I have a users table. And if I pull up Rails console and expand this, whoops, I'm in the console, so I can't do clear. I have to do Control L to clear it up. to move to the top of the screen. Okay, so if I type in user.all, it says uninitialized constant user. So what that means is I don't have a model for user. So I'm not using active record as yet. All right, so I have to do that. So at the very least, to work with the database layer, I have to create a model. So under app, you already have a to-do model. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'll call it user.rb. Now, naming convention is very important if you're working with conventions in Rails. By convention, if I have a users table, so plural users table, because I'll have many users, the model for that user is going to be singular lowercase user.rb. Okay, and then class user subclass from application record end. Now you may say, why is this application record and why not active record? Well, till Rails 4, this used to be active record base. Okay, but now we have this application record that actually extends from active record base. So all you need to do is extend from application record. Okay, so now that I've done that, what it means is Rails by default is giving me getters and setters, okay, for all the attributes. So if I pull this up, now I have getters and setters for all of these attributes for username and email just by having this model. Okay, so because I have to-dos as well, if I pull up to-do, I have getters and setters for the attribute name and also the attribute description just by having the model. Okay, and what are getters and setters? Now let's pull up Rails console over here. I'm gonna reload, bang. Okay, now if I expand this and hit Control L, okay, to clear it up. Okay, now if I type in user.all, there are no users, but if I type in todo.all, there you go. So you do the class, you write in the class name and then a method, all right, .all. Now what is a setter? Let's say I create a new user, user.new, okay? Now it says, all right, so class.new, and it basically creates an empty object, in-memory object, but I'm not referencing this anywhere. So let's say I do user equals, if I just do underscore, then it's gonna grab this user object that I created. So now if I just type in user, I have an empty user object, name nil, email nil, created at, updated at, everything is nil. So a setter is this, user.name, I can grab, okay? Now this is a getter. If I just type in user.name, it'll return the name. So I have access to this name attribute or name column in my users table, okay? So this name, here I have it listed as username, but name column of my users table, just because I have the model. And then I can do user.name equals, and then I can say Masroor. Okay, so now if I go user, check it out, the name is Masroor. So that is a setter, okay? So now I have getters and setters, so I can do this as well, user.email, and I can say masroor@example.com. Okay, so now if I go user, check it out, user.created@ equals time.now. Okay, user.updated@ equals time.now. Okay, now if I go user, check it out, I have filled in my entire in-memory user object. And when I say in-memory, it's because it hasn't hit the database yet. It's still in memory because I haven't saved my user as yet. And how do I know that? If you look at this user ID, see it's still nil. Once it hits the database, Rails will automatically assign this ID field, okay? So now let's try user.save. Okay, now look at what generated. By using these getters and setters, I've been able to assign attributes, okay, assign values to the attributes. And when I save it, it generates the SQL for me, and it tells me what SQL it generated. Check it out. Insert into users table, name, email, created, updated at, values of name, Masroor, okay? For email, masroor@example.com, created at the time, and then updated at the time. And then it committed the transaction. So simply by using this Ruby, by using Active Record setters, I've abstracted away this entire layer of SQL that I did not need to type out. Otherwise, I would have to create this query in order to impact the same way, okay? So now I have a user in the database. So if I type in user.all, check it out, I have the user. Now, let's look at my to-dos. If I type in todo.all, they're all my to-dos, but my to-dos are not associated with any users. So that is what I want to do now. How do I do that? How do I associate to-dos with user? Let's just go todo.all. I don't have a user ID, okay? I don't have a user ID for my to-dos, and I need that because that is going to be the foreign key that associates the two tables. Let's say this to-do ID 1. What if I say that Masroor is the user who created this to-do? I need to add that user ID attribute to this table. So let's go ahead and do that. We can do that. Let me exit out of the console. Let's Rails generate migration. I'm going to say add user ID to to-dos. And the name you give it doesn't matter because it simply creates this migration file. And if I go to my DB, I see this new migration file. Okay, define change. Now I'm going to use this method, add column. And the first item you give it is the name of the table. So it's going to be to-dos table. The column I'm going to add is user_ID. And it's very important to basically call this user ID, because if you call it anything else, then you're going to have to specify what it is. By convention, Rails is going to be looking for this, okay? So user ID, and then it's going to be the type, okay? And the type for foreign key is always going to be integer, all right? Actually, I made a mistake here. It's going to be colon integer. There you go. So the type is always going to be integer for foreign key, all right? So let me save that. And let me run this. So Rails DB : migrate. Okay, there you go. User ID has been added. Now if I hop on the Rails console, Control L. Okay, now if I type in todo.all, check it out. All of them have this additional attribute user ID of nil, okay? User ID nil, user ID nil. Okay, so now at least I have this column, all right? Now it's time to associate a user with a to-do. And to do that, I need to set up the association first. And remember, for one-to-many, it's this. I'm going to pull up the two models side by side. Let me actually close all of this. I have my user right here. Okay, I have my user, and let's pull up the to-do model right here, okay? So to-do, user, all right. So user is the one side of the one-to-many association. So in order to build it, I'm gonna say has_many space colon to-dos, all right? And then in to-do side, what I have to do is belongs underscore to space colon user. And we'll discuss what this means and more starting in the next video.